Dark Magician of Team Sorcerers here, and welcome back to What If Wednesday. And this one is another suggestion by Joseph Barfield 6930, and that is, what if Razer broke down during Series 5? And I did say it would be tricky because it would depend when Razer would break down. He did try and simplify it for just the heat final against Rick, but I'm willing to give this a go with all the different scenarios. So obviously all these alternate scenarios will have one thing in common: Razer doesn't win the 5th Wars. So yeah, if it broke down against Big Nipper, or like alternatively if Big Nipper was able to tip Razer over onto its side with the broken Shri mech, then Big Nipper would fight Widow's Revenge instead. Now naturally this would be a huge surprise and a major upset that the 4th seed, the 2-time world champion, has been knocked out, and in round 1, making it the worst it's ever done. So anyway, Big Nipper faces Widow's Revenge, and I feel like Big Nipper would beat Widow's Revenge quite easily, because all it would need to do is use the jaws to just flip it over. And then in the heat final against Rick, it would put up a decent fight, but Rick would just be the superior robot, flipping it all over the place, and Rick would go through to the series semi-finals. And I'm just going to try and speed things along a bit. Alternatively, if Razer broke down against Widow's Revenge, then yeah, the Widow's Revenge team would have their revenge on their partners and go through, but then Widow's Revenge again wouldn't stand a chance against Rick. Like, Rick would just flip it over quite easily and go through to the semi-finals. And then of course, if Razer broke down against Rick in the semi-finals, broke down against Rick in the heat final, Rick still goes through to the semi-final. So in those 3 scenarios, one way or another, Rick is going through to the series semi-finals and will face off against Spawn again. Now the other semi-final matches all play out the same way, basically, but Spawn again just has the superior flipper and would flip Rick all over the place and even out the arena and go through, making it the best that Spawn again has done so far. And Rick would go into the loser's melee with S3 and Wild Thing. Now while Rick could put up a good fight against Wild Thing, it would get trashed by S3. I mean, I feel like it would just struggle way too much, and S3 would go through and get back in. Then Bigger Brother beats Chaos 2, like in the original timeline, and then S3 would face Spawn again. Now, Spawn again does put up a decent fight. I don't think it would get to a point where Spawn again would flip S3 out the arena. I think S3 would just slam Spawn again on the side a few too many times, and probably cause it to break down. Either that, or I feel like S3 could win on a judge's decision and go through to the grand final. Then of course the other semi-final plays out the exact same way, with Hypnodisc and Firestorm going through. So the grand final, like Bigger Brother still would get pitted against Hypnodisc and beat it, which leaves Firestorm free to face S3. And since this is their first time meeting instead of the semi-finals of Series 6, I feel like it would play out basically the exact same way as before, with Firestorm shoving S3 all over the place and even tipping S3 out of the arena. So the 2 flippers will face off in the grand final, but first the spinners face off, Hypnodisc against S3. Now S3 very good machine, but I feel like Hypnodisc would more likely win this since it's just better controlled. Maybe it might get hit maybe once by the disc, but I feel like Hypnodisc could slam the side and slam the wheel and maybe jam up one of the wheels and just tear into the back of it. So, but yeah, I'm not being biased towards Hypnodisc or anything. I just genuinely think Hypnodisc could beat S3, or I could be wrong. Maybe I could be wrong. I mean, just remember that at the end of the day, these what-ifs are best guess. So, so Hypnodisc wins, finishes third, and in the grand final, Firestorm and Bigger Brother clash, and, well, I mean, let's be honest, every time these two robots encounter each other, Firestorm always comes out on top, so Firestorm 3 becomes the UK champion. But I'm not sure whether or not Firestorm 3 would return or Firestorm 4 would still get built. Now, we'll come back to Razer breaking down against Spawn again in a bit. So the seeds would be a bit different, and Rick would actually be seeded and would enter the 6th floor, because I'm assuming that it didn't qualify, because to be fair, Rick was in the Minor Meltdown competition in Extreme 2, so this would mean that Tornado wouldn't be seeded. I feel like Razer still would be, but where it would be seeded, I'm not quite sure. Maybe 5th. Either way, the seeds would be 1 Firestorm, Bigger Brother would still be seeded 2, 3 Hypnodisc, 4 S3. Actually, think about it, Chaos 2 would probably still be seeded 5th, and I feel like because Razer is still the 2-time world champion, it would still be seeded quite high, despite getting eliminated in the heat in this timeline. So Razer would be 6th, then 7 Dominator 2, and then 8 would be Spawn again, 9 would be Panic Attack, 10 would be Wild Thing, 11 would be Rick, and Stinger would be 12th. So to try and simplify this a little bit, we're going to put Rick in Tornado's original heat, and put it in Anarchy's fight, and replace it with Judge Shred 2.5. Because I've done this before, which was an idea someone else had, of just replacing one robot with a robot that would have lost that round. Something that would have been less likely to qualify. So yeah, Rick will replace Judge Shred 2.5. Otherwise, everyone stays in the exact same heats, the exact same battles, but switched around a bit. So for instance, Heat A, Firestorm's heat, it wins that. B, that would be Hypnodisc's heat, Hypnodisc still wins. C, well, that's Chaos 2's heat anyway, so literally nothing changes. Danton Kier wins that. D, Dominator 2's heat. Dominator 2 wins that one. Then E, Panic Attack's heat. Terahertz wins that one. And then F, which is Rick's heat. So in the first round of that, Tornado and Shredder will still go through. So Rick would face Anarchy, Revolution 2 and 4. Now I feel like Revolutions 2 would still get beaten due to lack of control and ends up breaking down. Now Rick would struggle to flip Anarchy over since it's a 176 kilo walker. I don't know whether or not it would be able to flip 4 over. It could probably lift it up a little bit, but I don't think it would be able to turn 4 upside down. But 4 would get its hammer in on the other robots, though. Probably wouldn't do too much damage. But I feel like 4 would survive to go to a judge's decision, but I feel like Anarchy and Rick would go through. So now things get I was going to say muddled up, but I'm not so sure. So I think Tornado would face Anarchy 1 round early, while Rick faces Inshreddable. And because Inshreddable still isn't in the best condition, it would lose against Rick, while Tornado beats Anarchy in the same way it did in the original timeline, and then in the Heat final, Tornado would defeat Rick. And it would most likely use the scoop. But yeah, Rick might have a hard time with Tornado. So in any case, regardless of who faces whom, Tornado is still going through. So Heat G, that will be Stinger's Heat now, and 13 Black wins that one. Heat H, that's now Wild Thing's Heat. Wild Thing wins that one. Heat I, that is Spawn Again's Heat, and Spawn Again still wins that one and manages to break the 8th seed curse here. Heat J, Razer's Heat. Razer wins that one. K, S3's Heat. S3 wins that one. And obviously Heat L, the last heat, Bigger Brother's Heat. Literally nothing changes. Bigger Brother goes through. So now things get interesting as we have a very different semi-final lineup. So in the first semi-final lineup, just to try and match Heat winners if possible, we would have Firestorm face Terahertz. I guess we'd still have Hypnodisc face Tornado, just to try and match the real timeline as much as possible, which would mean that Danton Kier would face Dominator 2. Yeah, that would work out. So obviously Hypnodisc versus Tornado, that plays out the same way. Now, Firestorm against Terahertz. I know in the real timeline Terahertz obviously lost to Firestorm, but that was because it broke down, more likely because it didn't recover from a fight with Razer. But here we have a healthy Terahertz who would just pound Firestorm into the dust and just leave it immobile, unable to move freely. So Terahertz defeats the champion and goes through. And as for Danton Kier against Dominator 2, now although Dominator 2 can usually beat flippers, I don't think it would beat Danton Kier. I feel like Danton Kier would just flip it all over the place and even get Dominator 2 out the arena. So now we have quite an interesting losers melee. So we've got Firestorm, Hypnodisc, and Dominator 2 all clashing with each other. I mean, Hypnodisc starts out pretty strong, but because Firestorm is in peak form at the time of Series 4, I don't think hit the disc would stand much of a chance, unfortunately, and would probably do what it did in the real time, and then just bounce off one of the robots, hit the wall, and then break down. And, well, Dominator 2 can't really do anything against either of these robots either, so Firestorm gets back in. So we've got Firestorm, Tornado, Danton Kid, Terahertz. I think Firestorm would face Danton Kid because it can't fight Terahertz again, and Tornado would fight Terahertz. So Tornado beats Terahertz in pretty much the same way it did in the Challenge Belt Tournament of Extreme 2. And Firestorm would beat Danton Kid. So yeah, that would pretty much play out in the same way it did in their All-Stars fight. So now there's one change to this timeline. Terahertz doesn't go through to the grand final. So in the other semi-final, we would have S3 fight Stinger. Again, try to match up similar heat pairings. Bigger Brother would fight Razer, which leaves Wild Thing to face Spawn again. Yeah, that's my best guess as to how it would go down. Or maybe Razer would fight a Wild Thing just to try and match the timeline again. So Bigger Brother would fight Spawn again. Yeah, that would make more sense. So S3 would defeat Stinger. I mean, it would kind of be a repeat of their fight from the Fifth Wars. Oh no, wait, what am I talking about? 13 Black is in this semi-final, not Stinger. Sorry, I brain farted for a moment there. Yeah, I feel like 13 Black would probably beat S3. Because I don't think it would get to a point where S3's disc could turn 13 Black over. I mean, yes, it would damage the discs, but not enough to make 13 Black break down or anything. So more than likely 13 Black would win that encounter. Razer beats Wild Thing like it did in the original timeline, and I think as for Spawn again and Bigger Brother, this is a tough one to call because both were having some issues round about this time. Because I know in the real timeline, Bigger Brother ended up getting slow and sluggish in its fight with Dominator 2. But since Spawn again is still having some interference problems, I feel like Bigger Brother would more likely win this one. So the losers melee would have Spawn again, Wild Thing, and S3. Like basically the exact same losers melee as in the Fifth Wars. So in this very similar losers melee, history repeats itself. I mean, Wild Thing doesn't stand much of a chance against either of them. Spawn again is still having those problems, so S3 just trashes them and goes through. So now we've got Bigger Brother, S3, Razer, 13 Black. Bigger Brother would face off against 13 Black and beat it, and Razer would face S3, and yeah, that basically plays out the same way as it did in the Fifth Wars. So in this timeline, Razer finally gets to the grand final. So basically, we have a pretty similar grand final to the real one, but bigger brothers there instead of terahertz. So we've got Firestorm, bigger brother, Razer, Tornado. So I feel like Firestorm would face Razer and bigger brother would face Tornado. Yeah, the fight between Firestorm and Razer basically plays out the same as their Series 5 fight, and what a clash that would be. The UK champion against the world champion, and Razer comes out on top here. Meanwhile, bigger brother would actually beat Tornado in the same way it did in the Extreme 2 All-Stars. So Firestorm and Tornado would face off in the playoff, and well, that would play out the same way as their Series 6 fight in the real timeline, let's be honest. So Firestorm finishes 4th for a change, and yeah, Tornado takes 3rd place. So bigger brother is in the grand final yet again, and this time is up against Razer. But yeah, this just plays out the same way as the Series 5 grand final, with Razer finally winning the grand championship and winning Series 6 instead of Tornado. So because of this would mean that Razer would actually return for the 7th Wars. So Razer would be seeded instead of Ming Dynasty, but I'm not going to go over that because I already went over this in another What If Wednesday episode. So that's what would happen if Razer broke down in the heat. But what if it broke down against Spawn again? Well, that would mean that Razer would be in the losers melee with Wild Thing and S3 instead, and Spawn again would go through. Again, Wild Thing would put up a fight against S3, but Razer would be able to beat either of them. It'd be easier for Razer to get straight at S3 and make the weapon stop working. So S3 would be powerless. Wild Thing would try and get at Razer's wheels, but Razer is just too quick and would start attacking Wild Thing and just munching down on it, even putting it in the pit. So chances are Razer will come out on top here. And Razer would fight bigger brother, while Spawn again takes on Chaos too. Yeah, it would be an epic flipper frenzy between the two, but chances are Chaos 2 will just get turned upside down and just run out of gas, and Spawn again goes through to the grand final. Meanwhile, Razer and bigger brother fight each other 2 rounds early, and, well, Razer just straight up wins that. And then, of course, again, the Series 2 semi-finals of the Fifth Wars would play out the exact same way, with Hypnodisc and Firestorm 3 going through. So Spawn again is in the grand final instead of bigger brother. So Spawn again would fight Hypnodisc while Razer takes on Firestorm. We know what happens with Razer and Firestorm, but Hypnodisc I think could come out on top and beat Spawn again here, just slamming and tearing the sides. And Spawn again would probably break down just because it did when fighting S3. So Hypnodisc goes through to the grand final. So the two flippers face off in the third place playoff. Both coming off the worst for wear. But yeah, the Firestorm team have to basically put a lot of effort into fixing the flipper just to make it work so they can have a chance against Spawn again. So they get it fixed, and I'm not... Well, it's hard to say who'd win between the two of them. I don't think it would get to a point where Spawn again would flip Firestorm out the arena. Firestorm would do a fairly good job keeping out the way, just like it did with Wheelie Big Cheese. Yeah, it's a tough one to call, a really tough one to call. Even if Firestorm gets turned over, it would get back up quite quickly. So, but yeah, it would just be too close of a fight between them. Then again, there is a chance that Spawn again could break down, just because of what happened in the original timeline with Razer damaging Spawn again that much, and then in the losers melee it broke down after like a couple of hits from S3. But I don't know, that just sounds like lazy writing. I don't know. But yeah, it would be a tough call to figure out. But, maybe if I had to go with my best guess here, maybe Firestorm might just edge out Spawn again. Just. So, and then in the grand final, well, I already went over this scenario in another episode, where Hypnodisc and Razer would meet in the Series 5 final, and I feel like Hypnodisc would more than likely win. So Hypnodisc wins the UK Grand Championship, and we will of course have the exact same robots seeded for the 6 floors, but in a different order. But this time it would be 1 Hypnodisc, 2 Razer, 3 Firestorm 4, 4 Spawn again, 5 Bigger Brother, no, Chaos 2, sorry, 6 Dominator 2, 7 Bigger Brother, 8 Panic Attack, 9 Wild Thing, 10 S3, and Stinger is still seeded 11th, and Tornado is still seeded 12th. And again, they're in the exact same heats, the exact same battles, but the heats are switched around a bit. So Heat A, Hypnodisc wins. Heat B, Firestorm wins. C, Dance on Kia. D, Bigger Brother. E, Wild Thing. F, 13 Black. G, Tornado. H, S3. I, Terahertz. J, Dominator 2. K, Spawn again. And L, Razer. So now, for semi-final 1, we would have Hypnodisc fight Wild Thing and beat it. Firestorm 4 would fight 13 Black and beat it. Then Danton, Kira and Bigger Brother would fight each other. So again, nice little flipper frenzy, but I feel like Danton Kira would be the superior robot here. I mean, yeah, they'd be able to flip each other over, but Danton Kira would have an easier time and even flip Bigger Brother out the arena, I think. So, the losers melee, we've got Wild Thing, 13 Black and Bigger Brother, and honestly, it would play out pretty much the same way as if it was Danton Kira still in the losers melee. So, Bigger Brother just defeats the both of them and gets back in. So who we got now? So Hypnodisc, Firestorm, Bigger Brother, Danton Kira. So Danton Kira would then face Hypnodisc, and Firestorm would fight Bigger Brother. Just because in these sorts of scenarios they tend to have the highest ranking robot get pitted against the lowest. And in a shock turn of events, Danton Kira would beat Hypnodisc. Hypnodisc is good, but I feel like it would play out the same way as that Challenge Belt Battle Royal thing, where they both fought Smidsy and Sachromolot, and yeah, this would just play out pretty much the same way, with Hypnodisc getting flipped out the arena and the champion being eliminated. So Danton Kira goes through to the grand final here. Meanwhile, Firestorm 4 would defeat Bigger Brother. So then, semi-final 2. I feel like we'd still have Spawn again fight Terahertz just to try and match the timeline a bit, which just leaves Razer, Dominator 2, Tornado and S3. So I feel like that Tornado would face S3 while Razer fights Dominator 2. That's the best way to figure it out, I think. So naturally, Terahertz beats Spawn again, as usual. S3 wouldn't stand a chance against Tornado. It gets pushed around too much, so Tornado wins. And Dominator 2 against Razer. Now, I went over this matchup before, and as I said before, I genuinely think Dominator 2 would beat Razer, even if it's on a judge's decision, because there's nothing for Razer to damage. It would have a hard time grabbing Dominator 2, plus Dominator 2 would more than likely damage Razer's self-righting mechanism. So even if it goes to a judge's decision, Dominator 2 would win this. So Razer is in the loser's melee with S3 and Spawn again. And yeah, Razer would just beat the pair of them quite easily, especially with Spawn again having interference problems. I mean, Razer would probably go after S3 first anyway, and just crush the hell out of it. Then again, S3 could see it coming and might in turn try and get to Razer first, but I feel like Razer would more than likely still come out on top in this anyway and get back into the competition, and would face off against Terahertz. Meanwhile, Tornado beats Dominator 2 like in the original timeline, and Razer beats Terahertz like one round earlier. So basically, again we have a similar grand final, but this time Danton Kier's there instead of terahertz. So with this, Razer would fight Danton Kier and beat it. Tornado fights Firestorm 4 and beats it. And Firestorm would beat Danton Kier in the playoff and finish third again, and then the grand final plays out the exact same way as in the real timeline. And then just everything else plays out the same way as the original timeline, so I'm not going to go over the 7th Wars again. Now let's see what would happen if Razer broke down against S3. And I think I remember actually someone covering this on Reddit or another website actually, where they said, what if S3 won instead? So yeah, this would mean obviously S3 goes through to the grand final and would face Firestorm and lose against it. Then in the playoff, Hypnodisc beats S3, and in the grand final, Firestorm beats Bigger Brother. And again, we'd have the same seeds, but they'd be mixed around again. So, yeah, Bigger Brother would still be seeded second, but Firestorm would be number 1. Then we'd have 3 Hypnodisc, 4 S3, 5 Chaos 2, 6 Razer, 7 Dominator 2, and then everyone else basically stays the same. So, as a result, we have Firestorm winning Heat A, Hypnodisc wins Heat B, Danton Kier C, Dominator 2 D, Wild Thing E, 13 Black F, Tornado G, Spawn again H, Terahertz I, Razer J, S3 K, Bigger Brother L. So, let's see, we would have, I guess Firestorm would still fight 13 Black. I was going to say it would fight Wild Thing, but it makes more sense again to match the timeline as much as possible. So Wild Thing would fight Hypnodisc instead, and again Danton Kier faces Dominator 2. So again, we're going through some similar matches here. So Firestorm beats 13 Black, Hypnodisc beats Wild Thing, Danton Kier beats Dominator 2. Now, Wild Thing wouldn't stand a chance against Dominator 2 or 13 Black anyway, but I just wonder who'd win between the other two. I know 13 Black beats Dominator 2, but that was in a 1v1, and Matilda was in that fight, but in this Losers Melee, the house robots are Dead Metal and Sir Killalon, so it's hard to say, really. I mean, it would be quite close. I guess it would come down to damage. I mean, Dominator 2's axe can definitely damage 13 Black's discs. Whereas 13 Black, I think it actually did damage Dominator 2 a little bit. I vaguely remember seeing some photos of Dominator 2 after that fight on a website a long time ago. I'm trying to remember if they were from 13 Black or Matilda. But then again, I don't think the damage from Dominator 2's axe would be that significant, so I'm going to go with my best guess again and say that 13 Black wins this and gets back into the competition and would face off against Hypnodisc in a spinner showdown while Firestorm fights Danton Kier. So again, Firestorm would beat Danton Kier, and I think I went over a possible matchup with Hypnodisc and 13 Black. And Hypnodisc has a chance of doing more damage. Yeah, it would be quite close, but I feel like Hypnodisc is more controlled and would just do a bit more damage. So, best guess here, Hypnodisc wins this encounter and makes it to a 4th grand final, the only robot to ever do so. Meanwhile, in the other semi-final, well, Razer would fill the void of Hypnodisc here, as Razer would fight Tornado like 3 or 4 rounds earlier, and Tornado would use the frame, and it's basically the Series 6 grand final, the real one, and Tornado would beat Razer. Meanwhile, in the other matches, oh no, wait, because Dominator 2 was in the first semi-final, wasn't it? So never mind, scratch that. So we would have S3 fight Tornado, and Tornado would beat S3, Razer would face Bigger Brother and beat it, and Spawn again and Terahertz would face each other, and Terahertz would win. So the losers melee would be Spawn again, S3, and Bigger Brother. And, well, I feel like Bigger Brother's just going to come out on top. It would play out in a similar way to that All-Stars fight where Bigger Brother and S3 fight Firestorm, and Bigger Brother would probably throw S3 out the arena and then pit Spawn again, so they're back in. So now Razer and Tornado would fight each other, and and Tornado would eliminate Razer while Terahertz eliminates Bigger Brother. So now we have again a similar grand final, but Hypnodisc is replacing Razer. So I feel like to match the timeline, Firestorm would fight Tornado and Hypnodisc would fight Terahertz, and Tornado beats Firestorm, and I honestly think Hypnodisc would beat Terahertz, because round about this era, Terahertz just didn't seem to do well against horizontal spinners. So chances are Hypnodisc would come out on top here and really damage Terahertz. And it really depends how healthy Terahertz is, but one way or another, I feel like the playoff is going to be the same result, with Terahertz losing and Firestorm finishing 3rd. So Hypnodisc is in the top 2 for the first time since Series 3, but sadly it obviously stands no chance against Tornado, and yeah, Tornado just, well, it basically plays out the same way as their fight in the real timeline. So Tornado in this scenario would still win the 6 floors, and yeah, history carries on as normal. And so what if Razer broke down against Firestorm 3? Well, I already covered this in another episode where Firestorm would have won, so I'm not going to go over that again. So we'll skip to the last scenario where Razer would break down against Bigger Brother. Yeah, that would be a lousy way for its best run yet to end. So Bigger Brother would be the champion, much to my dismay, considering it eliminated Hypnodisc. So basically, they'd swap seeds and swap heats, basically. So, the 6 wars, Bigger Brother wins Heat A, Razer wins Heat L. Otherwise, everything else plays out the same way. Only this time in the respective semi-finals, Bigger Brother would face Wild Thing and Razer would face Dominator 2. So semi-final 1, yeah, Bigger Brother eliminates Wild Thing, the other fights play out the same way, the loser's melee plays out the same way, but now Bigger Brother would have to face Dance on Kier. Firestorm eliminates S3 as normal, and, well, I already went over what would happen if Bigger Brother fought Dance on Kier. Dance on Kier would throw Bigger Brother out and go through to the grand final. Other semi-final, Tornado beats Hypnodisc, Terahertz beats Spawn again, and as I said earlier, Dominator 2 would beat Razer. So now we have quite the loser's melee with 2 of the most destructive robots of all time, and Spawn again. But again, Hypnodisc would start strong, but would more than likely bounce off one of the robots in the arena wall and break down. But then again, as it was said before, the Series 6 version of Hypnodisc would more likely lose against Razer anyway, so I think Razer would just straight up get back in. Then round 2, Tornado beats Dominator 2 as normal, Razer beats Terahertz 1 round early. So again, we're left with a scenario where we have the same-ish grand final, only Dance on Kier is there instead of Terahertz. So let's see. Razer, Firestorm, Tornado, Dance on Kier. So, yeah. So then Razer would beat Dance on Kier, just like in the real timeline. Tornado beats Firestorm, Firestorm beats Dance on Kier in the playoff, and then the grand final would play out the same way as in the real timeline. Whew. So there we go. That's what would have happened if Razer broke down in Series 5. So, so depending on the scenario, either Firestorm or Hypnodisc would win the 5th Wars. Tornado would still win the 6th Wars, but with one exception, where Razer does win the 6th Wars. So, yeah, thanks very much for that suggestion. Yeah, I'm glad you guys enjoy these Robot Wars What Ifs. I know this is primarily a Yu-Gi-Oh channel, but yeah, I do like to talk about what if scenarios for Robot Wars, which is something I did a lot of thinking about during lockdown. Anyway, that's going to do it. Thanks for watching.